Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Mike. I'm a junior in McCormick here, and I'm the student organizer for the NED Lecture Series, and welcome to our first talk of the year and our one-year anniversary, kind of. NED has been around for 1 year, and the purpose is to provide some thought leadership in the disciplines of entrepreneurship and design for the Northwestern community. In McCormick, we feel that these disciplines are very important to everything we do, and even if you don't call yourself an entrepreneur or designer, we hope that you can garner something from the successful individuals that we bring in about once or twice a quarter. I just want to make one plug for the survey, if you don't mind, that I left by the door. Please fill out as much or as little as you want. The more important stuff, I'm the only one who's going to read these. The more important stuff's at the top. That's just so that we can keep addressing your needs and hear what you want to see and make sure that people keep coming to these so that they hear about it. NED is co-sponsored by the Siegel Design Institute, the building we're in, and the Farley Center for Entrepreneurship. So without further ado, I give you the director of the Farley Center, Mike Marasco.
Thanks, Michael. Thank you. I just wanted to take a couple minutes to give a very short introduction to our speaker today. I've known Suneel since he was a student here. He is one of our alums. He's a JD MBA, and he was in our first Nuvention Medical Innovation class back in 2007, 2008. It's funny that one of our alums is now part of a company that has become synonymous with sort of the rebirth of sort of the tech ecosystem here in Chicago, being Groupon. Suneel's one of the only people I know who in my LinkedIn contacts has over 500 connections. So that tells you something about him, how well connected he is. But he's also proud of the people I know is someone who really I have the high degree of respect for because he's done a lot of different things. And when I came out of business school, it was the concept of like switching roles every couple of years wasn't respected. But now that's actually something I look to. And he's had a phenomenal amount of experience starting at places like Accenture, but then moving into going to places like Mozilla, as well as doing some work in the media space, and has really been sort of a passionate believer about new technologies and and how to leverage them. He's the first person that has been a student of mine that I've asked to come back and actually be on one of our advisory boards, and he actually is an advisor to the Nuvention web class, which will be starting here in January. And beyond all that, he's really been passionate about giving back to the institution. He spent time here at Northwestern and coming in to share some of his thoughts with you today around around kind of what it means to sort of be at this intersection. And he and Michael and I have spent a bunch of time sort of thinking about what his presentation should be today. So I'm very excited to hear it. But without further ado, I'm going to hand you guys over to Suneel Gupta.
So thank you all very much. I do appreciate the invitation from both Mike and Mike. I've been trying to think about kind of what I wanted to talk about today, and I think it's sometimes hard because the people here at Northwestern, especially for something like this, an event like this, they already have a pretty accomplished group of people who are doing interesting things. They're on their way to go and do interesting things, already have done interesting things. So the question I have is kind of what can I potentially try to talk to you about today? And what I came out with was the case against Sunday. But let me back up for a minute. This building is actually kind of special for me because it's good to be back on campus, but I particularly enjoyed walking by this building because it reminded me of my mom, who worked at Ford Motor Company for 35 years. And her story kind of relates a lot to what I want to talk to you about today, because as a little girl in Gujarat, India, in a very rural area, she had sort of the idea that she wanted to be an engineer. And at that time, the career potential for a woman was incredibly limited. She fought her family, she fought her friends, fought universities, fought hiring managers, and finally became the first female engineer to work at Ford Motor Company, which was something that humbles me every time I.
So anyway, this building reminds me a lot of her, and again, I'm incredibly humbled to be here. A lot of what I wanted to share with you today are things that she kind of passed on to my brother and on to me, and there are really three things, and I actually don't have a lot of slides, so I think we're going to have some time for questions, and I do look forward to that. But these three things are the things I want to share with you, and they all sort of roll up into this idea of the case against someday. And it really begins with the first point, which is that conditions are never perfect, so begin now. Before I really kind of dive into this, let me just say that the word someday is used a lot. And it's used a lot in my conversations with students at this university. It's used with people, a lot of my peers, because we all have ideas. We all have things that we want to accomplish. We all have products we want to build, businesses we want to run, screenplays we want to write, books we want to write. And oftentimes, we don't pursue those goals. We don't pursue those ideas. We wait because we feel like the timing isn't right. And so the first idea I want to sort of propose to you is that conditions will never be perfect. So start now. How many of you watched TED? Have you heard of TED? It's a great, so pretty much all of you. The TED Talks are fantastic, and about a year ago, a guy named Simon Sinek gave a talk about powered flight in the early 20th century, which was a really amazing talk, and he talked about how powered flight in a lot of ways is very similar to the dot-com sort of era of today. You have the most brilliant minds in the space sort of competing to solve important problems. That was the same way as powered flight back in the early 20th century. And if you really think about sort of the ideas by which people don't pursue a business, why they don't try to solve a problem, it's usually a permutation of two things: not enough capital and not enough talent. Those are usually the two things, two ideas where people sort of let themselves get blocked from pursuing their business or their product. So getting back to powered flight, you have a situation in the early 20th century where people are trying to solve this problem. A lot of people are getting into the game, and one of the people getting into the game is a guy by the name of Suneel Pierpont Langley. Suneel Pierpont Langley had all the things that we think about when we think about the ingredients of how to start a successful business or venture. First of all, the Department of War gave him $50,000, which is a lot of money back in the early 20th century, to solve the problem of powered flight. He was a Harvard-trained scholar and had access to the brightest minds in this country. He could pick up the phone and build a team, which is exactly what he did. He built a world-class team to build to solve the problem of powered flight, to essentially get the first powered flight experiment off the ground. So why have none of us ever heard of Suneel Pierpont Langley? It's because a few hundred miles away, two quirky brothers, Orville and Wilbur Wright, were trying to solve the same problem, only there were some differences. Number one, there was no pedigree to this team. They owned a small bicycle shop in Dayton, Ohio. Number two, no college education. Not a single person on the Wright brothers team had more than a high school education. And number three, really no access to talent. I mean, it was Dayton, Ohio. So all three of these things sort of coming together, but at the same time, these guys realizing that this was a problem that they wanted to solve. Now, very easily could have said, you know what, the conditions aren't perfect. We don't have the capital, we don't have the talent. But instead, they dove in to the problem. They didn't wait for someday, and that is why today we talk about the Wright brothers all the time, and that is why none of us, I'm assuming, have ever heard of Suneel Pierpont Langley. But in order to take that first step, in order to really do something, I think that is sort of the idea too, is why we sometimes don't get started on our businesses. Sometimes we don't pursue our ideas, because that first step is really hard. And so, doing some thinking and talking to people about how it is that they started their new idea, how they took something from concept to reality. What was that very first step? And I think what you'll find talking to people who have been successful, particularly in the tech industry, is that first step is really to draw it out. Some of you may have heard of this concept. It's not complex, but it's amazing how many of us don't do this. So you have an idea for a screenplay. You have an idea for a book. Taking that idea and actually putting it down on paper, writing a treatment or speccing out a design, is something that very few of us do, but it happens to be the most critical and important step. But don't take it from me. Take it from people like Jack Dorsey, the founder of Twitter, on why drawing it out is so important.
So what would that look like? And I thought about this a lot, and I was, there are many, many sleepless nights. I think everyone in this room has felt the verge of an idea and how it just gets you a little bit excited and crazy, and you can't sleep, and you're on a whiteboard or you're drawing like crazy. But that is one of the most important things to start doing, is to start drawing your idea, to start getting it out of
your head. That's it. Getting it out of your head. So drawing it out, really critical. This is what Twitter looked like in the very beginning. Simple piece of paper, the kind of thing that Jack Dorsey was walking around and just sharing with his friends. And as you may not be surprised, that paper did not really do all that much for him. I mean, it didn't help him sell his business. But what he ended up doing was he ended up kind of taking, again, something that was really important to him inside his head and starting to flesh it out. And he was able to take that piece of paper that you see right now, share it with friends, get feedback, and eventually develop a prototype. And that ended up becoming what a lot of us use today. So drawing it out, I think, is a really important step. And again, it may seem like one of these things is very basic, but it's amazing how many people who have ideas, who have something great in their mind, that won't just take that first step, put it down on paper, and then be willing to share it with other people. Which really kind of brings me to my third step, and that is related back to Jack Dorsey, which is that, again, this initial prototype, not all that impressive. Something that a lot of people, a lot of venture capitalists in particular, even when it was built into a prototype, said, this is the stupidest thing ever. No one's going to use Twitter. It's not something that's going to gain any traction. And it eventually did, and it proved everybody wrong. And I think that part of the reason that they were able to prove everybody wrong is because they were able to take that feedback and take what wasn't working, scrap that, take what was working, and build on top of it. And that brings me to really the third and final point, which is if you suck at first, you got to keep going. So we talked about the Wright brothers. We've talked about Twitter. The third and final story, actually, sorry, the second to last story is about a guy named Andrew Mason, who was a University of Chicago public policy student in graduate school, had an idea. And the idea was really about how to change the way that we do fundraising. So what he thought was broken with the fundraising model today is that I will come to you and I will say, listen, I want to raise $50 to build a school in Ghana. Will you give me $50? It's for a good cause. And you may say yes, but you don't really know where that money is going, if it's actually going to be used to build that school. Right? And if it's actually going to be meaningful. Would your $50 actually have helped the cause? What Andrew said is, why don't we change that? And the way we're going to change it is this. I'm going to start a campaign. And that campaign is going to be however much money I think I need to meet my goal. If it's to build a school in Takoradi, Ghana, then I assume I need $5,000. And what I'll do is I'll come and ask you for $50, but here's the trick. Until I hit $10,000, no one's credit card gets charged. So I ask all of you to donate $50, and you say, I will, but only if you hit that $10,000 mark. It's sort of a tipping point effect. He bundled that to a product and called it The Point. Check it out.
Sue looked at the old park with a heavy heart. It had seen better days. She remembered playing on it when she was a kid, but no one had used it for years. Sue's friend told her about a campaign on the Point to fix up the park. That's nice, but do you really think enough people will pitch in to get the park where it needs to be? I'd just be throwing my money away. Well, what would it be worth to you to see it fixed, her friend said. If I knew it would actually happen, I'd throw in a couple $100. My kids would love to be able to use that park. Her friend said, on the Point, you don't actually give any money until you have enough to get the job done. Now, this made a lot of sense to Sue, so she pledged $200, knowing it would only be taken if they reached the tipping point necessary for the park to be fully restored. Well, there must have been a lot of people like Sue who only wanted to donate if they knew everyone else would too. In short order, they reached the tipping point and the park was restored to be as beautiful as ever. Community service, powered by The Point.
So pretty cool. I love that idea, and I thought it was brilliant when I read about it. I was in San Francisco at the time. It was a brilliant idea. Here's the problem. It wasn't a brilliant business. It wasn't making a profit. And soon, The Point and their small team sort of ran out of money, and then they didn't really know what to do. Now, most people, and including myself, I think in that situation, probably would have re-enrolled in school. Probably would have gone back and said, you know what, I had an idea, I gave it a shot, it didn't work out. It was interesting, it didn't work out, and so I'm going to go back to school. Not Andrew. So what Andrew did is he said, you know what, there's this concept that I feel here, this campaign, this tipping point concept. What else can I do with this? And what was interesting is that about 2 years ago in Chicago, as he was walking around the city of Chicago, realized that a lot of local businesses were half empty, even on a Friday, Saturday night. They didn't have the business that they did a year ago. The economy was tough. People weren't going out enough. And so what he said was, why don't I take this idea of the campaign, of a tipping point, and apply that to help out these local business owners? What if I set up a deal every single day where people could get a great deal on a great local business, but the only trick was that enough people had to join in order to make the deal activate? He called it the deal of the day, which ended up becoming a brand that you may have heard of.
What is Groupon? Groupon is an easy way to get huge discounts while discovering fun activities in your city. Each day we feature a cool new experience at an unbeatable price in dozens of cities across the country. From restaurants, theaters, spas, stores, and special events, we work with the best local businesses to offer one deal each day at an incredibly low price. Using Groupon is easy. Check in every day to see the new deal, or subscribe to our daily alerts and the deal will be emailed to you each morning. If you see something you want to do, sign up. If enough people sign up, the deal will activate. By requiring a minimum number of buyers, we can guarantee businesses lots of customers and ensure that our subscribers receive maximum discounts. We call it collective buying power. When you find a deal you love, just enter your name and credit card. You won't be charged unless enough people join for the deal to activate. To make sure the deal reaches its minimum, tell your friends using Facebook, Twitter, email, or carrier pigeon. When enough people join, we'll send you your Groupon, which you can print and use like cash.
So the point becomes Groupon. Pretty amazing story. For those of you who haven't read the Forbes article recently, Groupon was called the fastest growing company of all time. Andrew does not regret his decision to not re-enroll in the School of Public Policy. Things are going pretty well. I want to kind of wrap up here really by talking about what I think we're really here to talk about, which is your craft. Again, I really believe, and I wouldn't be here right now if I didn't, that you all have great ideas within you. It's amazing how many conversations I have with students at Northwestern that have a new idea for something that is great. And what I'm really here today to try to convince you to do is not wait. When I was in 7th grade, I talked about my mom earlier on, and you know, it's interesting, I remember this story pretty well. I was in 7th grade, and I was in my social studies class, and I actually did not enjoy that class all that much, but there was one day in particular that I enjoyed it a lot, and it was the day that we got to watch John F. Kennedy's inaugural speech, and we would pause it in between, and Mrs. Knauer, our teacher, would talk about the speech and what was going on, and it fascinated me, and it made me realize that what I wanted to do with my career was become a speechwriter. That's what I wanted to do. And it was interesting because at one point during the speech, she paused it and let us know that it was actually not John F. Kennedy that wrote the speech. It was a guy named Ted Sorensen who actually wrote the inaugural address that he gave, and this was in 1961. And I thought that was fascinating. And I raced back home and I called my mom and I told her that this is what I want to do. I want to be a speechwriter for the rest of my life. And what my mom told me was interesting. She said, you know what, you don't have to, I was 13, you don't have to wait to be a speechwriter. You can do that now. You can just start writing speeches, which was kind of a ridiculous idea looking back on it. But I did. I started writing speeches, and what I would do is I would write these ridiculous speeches, and I would get on my bike and I would ride to the offices of local congressmen, local city officials, and essentially hand them speeches. At which point, one of two things happened. I was either asked to leave or asked to stuff envelopes. And I would write these speeches, and again, they were ridiculous, but I would continuously get better at it. And I bring this up because all of us, with these ideas, we have a craft. We have something within us that we love to do, whether or not we're getting paid for it, whether or not it's being used. And for me, in my case, none of these speeches were ever getting used, but I was constantly sort of becoming better and better. And I was sharing it with people who I respected, sharing it with my family. They would tell me how I could make the speeches better, share it with friends. And eventually, by the age of 16, I sort of had this useless sort of trait or craft for being able to write good speeches. What happened was a local congressman passed through my town, a guy by the name of Bart Stupak, and I ended up writing a speech for him. I was a little bit older now, about 16 years old, and I handed him a speech, And I told him I took the liberty of preparing your remarks for tonight, and he was really weirded out. Obviously, did not use the speech, but he did call up some of his friends at the White House. He called up a guy named Michael McCurry, who was press secretary at the time. The Clinton administration had just gotten sort of started a couple years back, and said, "Listen, if you're looking to hire on somebody junior to come write speeches, this might be a good guy." And a year later, I got a call from the White House saying, "Why don't you come on board and write speeches?" So had I not gotten started, had I not sort of biked to offices of local congressmen and been kicked out, I wouldn't have gotten to that point. It was a lucky break, but it was my craft. And whether or not that would have happened, I can sincerely say that I would have enjoyed doing it. And so that's a question that I encourage you to ask yourself, which is, if there is something out there that you love to do, whether or not you're getting recognition or whether you're getting paid, what would that be? And I really encourage you to start focusing on that. When I called my mom that day after 7th grade class and asked her how I could become a speechwriter, she said to me that you don't have to wait. And that is exactly what I say to you today. If there's something inside you, an idea, a vision, you don't have to wait for someday to do that. You should be able to do it now. Thanks so much.